Today we are talking about the 2010 film Waiting for Superman, a powerful documentary by a director named Davis Guggenheim, who also directed An Inconvenient Truth and It Might Get Loud, two very different documentaries. And this one follows the lives of some parents and their student children as they navigate the world of failing schools. And it asks a question that is a powerful one, and that is, why do only wealthy parents and people of resources have access to better schools, or at least the choice of a better school? Mm. Instead, many of them have to rely on a type of lottery to determine the school they want to go to. And it is very dramatic, but very hard to watch at times, as you see some of these children not draw the ball to pick the school. And so you see a future that looks a little darker. I thought that was great, but the film also inspired in a way, because you got to see some very good schools and some excellent teachers. And at the same time, the movie makes a distinction between the teachers union and teachers, which is not the same thing. I highly recommend it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Thanks for, this is the second time I've seen the film. And when I sat there, I had a kind of preconceived, when I first saw it, I thought it was this type of movie. And then as I'm watching, I go, oh, no. And it's really what you share right now. It's more about just failing schools. And it mentioned somewhere in the video that only one out of five schools that are charter are successful. And then I said, oh, wow, I thought there would be more than that. And then, so I thought, it's not really a movie about charter schools. Is it a movie about public schools? No, well, it talks about how public schools are also failing and so forth. And then, like you mentioned, it talked about unions and it talked about change and how it's so difficult in education to make changes. I always thought, what I thought was really interesting, I'm not sure if you caught it, I'm sure you did, talking about the evolution of the unions with schools, where at first when unions came about, it was because most teachers were women, and they were being treated really poorly because they're being treated like, you know what, your husband's work, so we're going to pay you less. And so that was kind of like, but some of these women didn't have husbands, and they were being paid, terrible wages, so the unions came about.
So you're talking about at the turn of the century, America, where a lot of female teachers were getting the short end of the stick because they're.
And I'll be honest with you, I could see why the unions came about. And also, I'm not against unions even today. I feel like there's a lot of good that comes about it. However, they brought up a couple of areas that really I was just thinking about, trying to figure out a solution to it. And the movie talks about that quite a bit. And one of those pieces is that the piece about tenure, And before I even talk about that,
that's more of the authentic.
Yeah, I want to say first.
What did you think of the film?
That's what I was about to say. I jumped the gun. I do want to say this. I like the film a lot. I love documentaries. As I'm watching, I go, oh, this is one of my favorite documentaries. Because it's about education, but it was done real well. It was about a documentary person who was making this movie, documentarian, I guess you call it. He actually had done one in the past, like 25 years ago, and he followed these teachers, and he was blown away. And there's some really good teachers that are portrayed in the film. And he goes, man, these people just do some incredible work. And you saw just some incredible teaching in the film, which I thought was great. So now about the authenticity, I would say that I thought it was authentic, dealing with the issues that it brought up.
Before I get give my perspective on the authenticity, I want to point out a couple of things that were eye-opening, to say the least. Here's some numbers. So you mentioned teachers unions, you mentioned this and that, and I did too. But really, would you not agree that this is about a director, Guggenheim, that we're talking about, who's concerned, and as all these people depicted in this film, about the state of schools, especially as it relates to students in underserved areas?
Yes.
Okay. That's really at heart. At the film. Later on, they talk about how part of the problem is the teachers' unions.
Yes.
So that's going to make some people uncomfortable, and I absolutely. But can I go over some numbers for a moment? 24%. This is 2010 numbers. 24% in California proficient in math. 24% of students. Now, DC, 12%. So we can feel pretty good about California. Listen to this. At Locke High School, up into 2010, 60,000 kids had attended Locke High School in its history.
Wow.
40,000 of those did not graduate.
Jeez.
So they really build this notion here that we had some problems here in schools. How do we solve it?
And I think that's the thing, is that we don't always talk that way. We don't talk about how do we solve it, or maybe we ignore that because when we talk about the unions, I don't think that's the only issue, obviously, but they did bring up an issue like tenure and how the history of tenure. I felt like, okay, I get it. It's difficult to fire a bad teacher right now, and there's some bad teachers in education, and I think people don't want to talk about that. And I think that's an issue he brought up to say, hey, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we address that issue? Because there's some people that should not be teaching. And there's a lot of people out there who should be and are being kept away from it, probably because they're seeing what's going on, the failing schools and so forth.
Okay. Well,
how do you feel about that?
Let's talk about the authenticity. Then you mentioned tenure. So this is a knockoff, at least from my experience.
Okay.
I have tenure.
Right.
But in the movie, it says you just have to breathe and you get tenure. For me, that's not accurate. Okay. My tenure process was a little bit more grueling than that, and it took years. Okay. So my question to you was tenure easy? For
me, it was easier because I got
keeping it real.
Because I'm being real. Because when I started in my current position, 25 years ago, I already had my credential, and I only needed to work in the district for 2 years. And once I did the 2 years, then it became very difficult to release me.
So, to play the devil's advocate here, the movie would suggest that you are part of the problem.
I don't think they would say that. I would say because they
said tenure is part of the problem.
Not me as a teacher being tenured. That
tenure is not a grueling process.
Right.
That they just hand it to people. Mm-hmm. Then they are suggesting that you are part of that because you took tenure easily.
I took it, but if they're going to give it to me, right, I'm not going to take it. Maybe they shouldn't give us a raise, but am I not going to take it? Of course, I'm going to take it. It was set before me. I took it, and all new teachers, I think, if they're going to give you that, leeway, you're going to go for it, or that step, go for it.
But do you agree with that? It would be hard for you to answer.
It's hard.
Objectively, you can't answer it.
Yeah, it's difficult. Obviously, there's a lot. As being in education, I can honestly say there's way more better teachers than poor teachers, but they're poor ones, and they're still in the system, and they're never going to leave unless they do something really crazy, and to get them out. And I've been in schools where, there's been years where there's 3 or 4 teachers dismissed because they've done some really outlandish things. But that's the only way you could release a teacher now is if they do something illegal, pretty much.
So we're still on the authenticity part of it. I wanted to say that there's a scene in the film where this girl, Nakia, she's a middle school student who couldn't go to her graduation ceremony because her mother could not make the final payment or the monthly payment towards tuition. And that's the reality. We're talking about how some of these parents are having to pay money that they cannot really afford,
right.
But they are obsessed, understandably, of getting their child into a reasonably good school. But did you have this feeling that I did, where the girl is watching the graduation ceremony from across the street because she lived across the street from the school,
right?
And she's staring and she goes, "I can't go to the ceremony."
Right.
And I was thinking, wait a minute. Hey, Guggenheim, director, why don't you kick down some of that money?
And let
some
her
of
go.
that inconvenient truth money.
Right.
Come on, it's $500. And he's married to Elizabeth Shue.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm sure there's some Karate Kid money laying around. They could have had $500. Come on.
Yeah, that will kind of hit me kind of strange. Like, wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. We're filming this, but this poor child is crying because she can't go to her graduation. It didn't make sense. And you and I would probably kick down some money just for this poor kid because you felt like later on you see her, I'm going to spoil something. Later on you see her attend the lottery, and she also doesn't get the winning ball, right? And so now you think this poor girl her life has already been doomed. She didn't make her graduation. Now she's not going to go to her school of choice.
I do want to bring it back to what you were saying about charter schools versus public. I really don't think that argument even. I'm not saying you were saying that that's the whole argument.
I think that was when I first saw it.
But there are some charter schools that are not doing well.
Oh, yeah.
So it is referring to those charter schools that are performing highly. And it wasn't just charter schools. It was also a private boarding school.
Yeah.
I think the broader question is access. Why do the wealthy or even upper middle class, however you
have access to it,
be the only ones with access?
Yeah.
I do want to point out a teaching strategy that was there. That is an excellent one. And I think this woman's name was Harriet Ball, who was teaching math concepts through song. And two things about that. One, it's very effective. But because I've done that before, and it is something that I think she emphasized in the story, in the movie, is that it should be through song, through songs that they know. And you sort of rewrite the lyrics.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Math concepts.
Yeah.
It is a really great idea, and it kind of does better with the recall subjects like math and history, where you have to recall a lot of facts. And for some students, it might need modeling. You might need to do it first, as I've done. And it's truly a good strategy.
Well, my favorite part of that part was that scene was that these two young teachers said, and they were openly saying, we stole that idea and we applied it to our classroom. And I feel like that's what we do as teachers. We steal, and we're the greatest thieves. If I feel like if you're a good teacher, you're a good thief. I mean, I can't think of too many things I've come up with original thought for my teaching. But I mean, even with you, I've learned so much. And so, and you teach different subjects. But I do want to share one thing though too regarding Michelle Rhee, who is I think she's now married to a basketball player, former basketball player Johnson. He was mayor of Sacramento. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, she was
Kevin Johnson.
Kevin Johnson is her husband.
Wow.
And Michelle Rhee at the time was married to Johnson, but she was married to somebody else. But she actually became superintendent. Then they call it chancellor in DC. And you see her really making an effort, an outsider trying to say, hey, let's bring in some ideas into the school district here, because they were failing, like you shared, 12%, I think, were right, reading and math and so forth, passing the state test exams. And so she said, hey, why don't we look at our schools? And she was actually becoming more successful. She was tunneling money to the schools instead of to the districts. And she said, let's do that first. And then she said, hey, why don't we also pay teachers more? And I'm like, oh, who's this lady? Right?
And then the union fought him back.
And they fought back because they say, hey, you know what? No, we're not going to do that because she was saying, hey, let's just pay teachers who are performing more. And I think that's an incentive, but that piece was thrown out. And I think there's something to think about regarding that. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Of course. I mean, it was an unfortunate thing because I think ultimately it was a counterproductive move. I will say in closing, Roosevelt High School dubbed a dropout factory. I know. And there was how would you like to be a teacher going there and
Los Angeles,
hearing that? Yeah. And the other thing is they mentioned KIPP schools, and I know that KIPP has been criticized for their methods, and you can argue methods and strategies all day, but sometimes certain methods work for certain kids, and you can't argue with some of their results. So am I saying I buy into the KIPP method? Maybe sometimes, I don't know. Yeah. And there's also another school in the LA area, which is a charter school, which is Green Dot.
Yes.
And they also get criticized for being too rigid. I wanted to bring this up because we get caught up in that. And well, I wouldn't do it like that. I would do it like this. But in the end, some environment, some students actually like rigidity.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to sometimes accept that, but some students want a little bit more order. And some teachers do better with that. Yeah. So I think it's good to have an open mind about these kind of things as we play.
And I will end with going along with what you shared. There's a scene in the film where a young boy, they ask him, hey, what do you think about going to this school that you won't be able to play video games and play with your friends, like you're going to be living on the campus? Right. And he said, well, you can tell it's going to be tough because I think it's good for my future.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, he saw it. He saw that, there's going to be some sacrifice, but he knew that he needed to come out of where he was at and go to a different environment for him to be successful.
Right.
And I thought that was big of him, and that was wonderful.
Okay. That'll do it for us. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications of the next upload. Thank you very much and goodbye.